Hi everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at sewing inverted pleats and the use of some contrasting fabrics for the interior portion of a pleat. So I have two examples to show you. One is going to be one interior accent color or fabric that is tucked inside the pleat off center on the front version of the skirt. The second example will feature a contrasting fabric with the interior portion of each pleat along the whole entire skirt. To begin, let's take a closer look at the inverted pleat. This is where the fabric comes in and then the fold lines come in to this center marking to create the pleat. So they fold in towards each other and then they meet at that middle point, and then this skirt has this same pleated design that repeats all the way around the whole entire garment. So you can see as those fold in, it is overlapping the fabric that is underneath. So for these examples, we are going to cut this portion in a contrasting fabric. So for the first example, we are going to do a red skirt with a black and white pop underneath for our contrast fabric. And I'm just going to use this detail on one side of the skirt front. So it will hit right where her leg is, off to the side, off center, just to add that little bit of design interest. So to begin, I've gone ahead and I've cut out a long strip for the main portion of the skirt. And I've gone ahead and cut this about an inch longer than necessary so that as I splice it apart, I have enough fabric to include seam allowance to sew it back together with my contrasting fabric. Now I'm going to look at the pattern piece, and the way this pattern piece is drawn, it has a fold at center front. So the actual skirt is twice as long as this, basically mirrored over to be one long strip. So I'm just going to count back to my second pleat from the center, and this is the part of the skirt that I'm going to want to cut out and insert a small piece of this black and white polka dot fabric. So I have this marked on here with a post-it note. I'm going to lay out my red fabric. I'm going to determine if I want to have that happen on the left side of the skirt front or the right side. And then I will look to see where I want to cut apart my red fabric. So I have this lined up with center back. I'm going to measure this all the way in. And then this is where this pleat portion is going to need to insert. Then I'm just going to go ahead and mark this with my marking tool. And then I'll come in and cut this 1/4 inch inside on each of my marked lines to allow for the insert spacing for my next piece. So here you can see I have this portion removed, and then on both sides of this I was cutting that 1/4 inch in from my marked chalk line. Then to cut my contrast fabric, I just had another portion of fabric that was cut the same width that it needed to, or the same length as the skirt. And then I will cut off a piece that is 2.5 inches wide. And again, that's because the measurement between my two fold lines is 2 inches, and I want to allow for a 1/4 inch seam allowance on each side. Then I'm just going to go ahead and match these up right sides together, just like this, and then sew this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So there we have that seam sewn. Then I'm going to open this up and I'm going to lay this whole thing up right sides together with the other side of the skirt piece and sew it on this side with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And here I have that piece inserted, and I've gone ahead and pressed my seam allowances towards the skirt main color fabric on both sides, because this is going to actually pleat back like this on top of itself. So the seam allowance should be pressed back towards the skirt. But we'll just go ahead and double check first that we have this inserted properly, lined up where we want it. So you can see here we have the center back of the skirt, and then as we work our way forward, we have this contrasting fabric lining up right here in between these two fold lines on the marked pattern piece. So then as I shift this down, this is going to be my center front, and then I have the whole entire rest of the skirt off to the side. Now that we have the contrast fabric inserted into the long strip, we're going to go ahead and hem the bottom and follow the instructions for the remainder of the pattern, which would be creating all of the inverted pleats. So first we'll hem the bottom and then we'll work to do the pleating. Now, because I'm working with this contrast fabric and on this design, I have it in just one location, I'm going to have my first pleat formed right here to make sure that I have this lined up exactly right. So to do this, I'm just going to mark the center point of this fabric. I'm doing that with a pin, and that is the point at which I'm going to fold in each side of my skirt fabric, and I'm just going to roll that back slightly so that the contrast fabric is underneath, and then I'll pin that down, and then I'll fold it over on the opposite side. And then once this is pressed at the hemline, it's popping open because of the hem right here, but once this is pressed, the contrast fabric will be hidden until the skirt separates when it's being worn. So here we have the first pleat formed. I can go ahead at this point, line that up with the fold line from this contrast pleat, and then go ahead and mark all of my other pleats, all the fold lines and the center points along the whole strip. And then I can pleat those by hand with pins and chalk, or I can use my machine, the tape method that I showed previously. Every one of these lines is 1 inch apart, so I know that I need 1/2 inch pleats to tuck underneath. So the pin method will be a little bit different because you're going to want to fold under and then you're going to want to fold over. But it is possible to use that method for the remaining portion of the skirt. So for the pin method, we would just go ahead and mark on here chalk lines. I'm going to do that for every fold line. And then I'll go in and use a pin, mark the center, and then work my way to fold all the chalk lines to those center pins, just like that, to create all the pleats along the length of the skirt. All right, so here we have the pleats pressed and pinned to this left side of this contrast pleat. So I'm going to go ahead and baste these down, and then when I get to this point right here for the remainder of this skirt, I'm going to use the method on my machine where I have the pleat marked with tape, and you can see me fold the rest of this as we sew. All right, so here I am with this contrasting pleat. I've stitched over the portion where the pleat folds together. I do have one more pleat formed right here. So what I need to do is stitch to the point at which it's folded on the underside. So this is a little bit more challenging with an inverted pleat, but I do have this pin right here, and I'm just using it really slowly. I'm going to stitch right up to the point where that pin is just in front of the needle, and then I can pull this pin out. Now at this point is where I'm going to want to make sure that when my needle is in the down position, I have the spacing for the pleat. So this piece of tape right here I have marked measures the 1 inch distance from the inside of the pleat to the next fold line. So every time I hit that point, I'm just going to put a pin in lined up with the tape, raise the presser foot. Now for this one, I'm going to want to fold this underneath, and I'm going to fold that until I hit the needle, which is in the down position. I'm going to lower that, and then there I have that pleat formed. Now I'm just going to stitch to the point of the fold, and then we're going to fold the next section of the pleat over the top. So then I have the needle in the down position, and I'm going to mark that, and then this time we will fold it over and bring that all the way up. And after I do this 1 or 2 times, I can count how many stitches it is until I get to that underneath portion so that when I'm stitching, because I can't see where that folds, I'll know. And so if I have my stitch length set, that was a couple stitches there. It looks like I can have one more stitch, and then I'm right where that underneath fold would be. So then I'm going to come in here and mark this again, raise the presser foot, and then this time I'm going to roll this back underneath to create the front side of that pleat. And then we'll just continue doing that same method down the rest of the skirt portion. Okay, so here we have that whole entire skirt portion is all pressed and pleated. It's been basted across the top, and you can see how this comes together and how this creates a little pop on one side that will have a contrasting fabric underneath. So then as this skirt gets folded and the center back is sewn, you can see then how that little accent pops on the one side. So this would be just above her leg, and every step this little pop would peek out, and it could coordinate with other pieces and trims that you incorporate to the rest of the outfit or dress. Now, if you're going to want to do this type of effect where you have a contrasting fabric underneath every single pleat along the entire length of the skirt, then you're going to want to start with 2 strips of fabric. These are cut the length of the skirt. I have a patterned print that is the green and yellow, and then I have a solid yellow. The yellow portion I'm going to use for the interior of each pleat. So each one of these little strips needs to be 2.5 inches wide. That's 2 inches for the piece of fabric measurement and 1/4 inch for each side seam allowance. So I have 2 pieces on top of each other right here, and I'm just going to work my way down and cut out a whole bunch of interior pleat pieces. And then I'm going to take some of these printed strips and I'm going to cut these 1.5 inches wide. It's for the 1 inch part that is the top of each pleat plus 1/4 inch for each side seam allowance. All right, so here I have my printed pieces and my solid pieces. So I'm just going to start with the underneath and match this up right sides together to my print fabric, and then I'm just going to alternate that to create the pattern. So I just want to go over to my machine and sew these all together, and then to pleat this it will be really easy because we'll be using these seam lines to basically create the pleats on top. All right, so here we have this whole strip, and now it is sewn together, and you can see that it alternates yellow print, yellow print, yellow print all the way down. So as I go ahead and form this, every one of these will fold inside, and that yellow portion will be the contrasting part, but the upper portion will be the print part. Now at this point, I am going to go in and press all my seam allowances back towards the print with a little bit back so that as they fold under, it's a little bit off of the seam and it looks clean from the front. I'm also going to go along and press my hemline. So I'll stitch my hemline, press all of my seam allowances, and then we'll work to do all of the pleating. And one thing I wanted to mention quickly, we cut all of these pieces based on the pleat measurements for the whole entire skirt body, but at center back, you'll notice that this interior portion, the colored portion, that does fit with every section for the whole entire skirt at center back is a little bit narrower. So it's just the inch plus a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So you just want to trim that remaining excess off of both of your ends before you go ahead and assemble your whole entire skirt. So here is this cute printed skirt. You can see when all the pleats are together, it looks like just this top layer of fabric, and then as it spreads apart, you can see all the contrasting fabric pop out underneath. So this comes together really cute. It works nice to use a solid against a print, and you can coordinate this with a dress that has the same fabrics or just with a blouse if you just use a waistband and turn this into a skirt. For this specific tutorial, I'm taking this pleated skirt portion and just making it a skirt. So I have the waistband cut out from the dress pattern, but I've gone ahead and just sewn it together along that top seam where it would have connected to the bodice. So that is sewn together, and I have this attached to the skirt, so then you can see my 1/2 inch seam allowance that's extending on both of the center back seam lines. So on the dress pattern, that has a zipper installed, so just for a little bit of a different instruction, we'll go ahead with right sides together. We will match up the bottom edge of the skirt here, and I'll sew this up just about 1.5 inches. So there I have the center back seam sewn, and you can see now how when this is finished, that pleat is going to be formed with both of these folding in at center back. So the part that we need to finish up here is this top portion of the waistband. So on one side, this right here is the wearer's right side. I'm going to just finish off this edge. You could do that with a serger or just a zigzag stitch. And then I will fold this waistband over so that that is extending. The center back seam is going to be pressed towards the wearer's left side. And then we're going to fold this under to line up with how that's pressed and fold the waistband over so that this side has a finished edge opening. This side will have the serged or zigzagged, and it will overlap. You can put a snap or a skirt hook right there. Those will overlap, and then the center back will be the pleat that's formed on top of that center back seam. So again, here we have both of these cute options. This is for use with an inverted pleat using a contrasting fabric on the inside, either as just a single accent or for the entire piece that you're working with. So this is a great way to add design interest to your pieces. You can do this on skirt pleats, you could do this on anywhere you have an inverted pleat tucked in. So I hope this has inspired you to add something like this to one of the projects that you'll be working on in the future.